as we've gone through this Lessons from the Boardwalk series, it's become very clear to me that not all of us grew up at the Jersey Shore with a boardwalk. And so as I was thinking about all of these different lessons, I was thinking about the different places that I had seen Ferris wheels. And you probably have a Ferris wheel in mind when you hear the word Ferris wheel, because they can be found at state fairs and carnivals and in major cities like London and Las Vegas. They're all over. They even are found in developing countries where they have people-powered ones. And they also have been in, I've seen them in shopping centers, so in shopping malls. So they're everywhere. But when Joe and I were planning this series, I said this was my favorite ride. He, of course, liked the roller coaster and wasn't so big on the Ferris wheel. I could leave a roller coaster, have left roller coasters many times. But Ferris wheels I really like. So it's been fun to do this series, but I kind of love that idea of just kind of going up, and I even love that kind of flip-flop that your stomach does when you come over the side, and then you go down again, and as you're going up, the sounds, the crowd below, and the music of the carnival rides and everything kind of just drifts away, and the next thing you know, you're up high and you can hardly hear what's going on. And then as you come back down around, the sounds begin, and you realize the world is still there, right where you left it. So we have a slide that shows a couple of different Ferris wheels. There's tons and tons of thousands of Ferris wheels probably around the world, but the one on the left is a picture of the first Ferris wheel, and that was built by or designed by a man named George Washington Ferris, and it was designed for the Chicago World's Fair in 1893. And just 2 years later, in Phoenixville, PA, they built that one that's was in Asbury Park. In 1895, that one first was installed in Asbury Park. Some of you may remember it. That was my first Ferris wheel, the one in Asbury Park. And I used to love the fact that it came out of the roof, and when it came out, you could see the ocean and the boardwalk and down to over to Ocean Grove, and there was a lake there with swan boats in it in Asbury Park. I just loved everything about Asbury Park. I've been told that Phoenixville, PA is now trying to restore that very Ferris wheel, and they're going to kind of hopefully put it in their historic district in Phoenixville, PA. So stay posted on that. And what else about Asbury Park? Oh, that Ferris wheel in Asbury Park originally had an observation deck. You could go up out of the roof, and then there was an observation deck. You could get off the Ferris wheel and look out, and apparently, according to the internet, you could see as far as Atlantic City. So I'm guessing there was not so much smog then. Some of you may have been on a Ferris wheel. The London Eye is a really big one, but now the biggest one is in Las Vegas. It's called the High Roller, and that just opened in March of this year. There are already plans for an even bigger one because New York is not going to be outdone by Las Vegas, so they're going to be building one in New York, apparently, that will be even bigger. So Ferris wheels are pretty amazing things. What we're doing with this, our theme for the Ferris wheel is perspective, because you actually get a pretty awesome perspective when you're up high. Many of these Ferris wheels, like the London Eye and the one in Las Vegas, and even the first one, they actually had cars that held many people, and they moved fairly slowly, so you really can see the city, and that's how the one in London is, and the one in Las Vegas moves very slowly, so you can really, really observe and get a different perspective, as Nicole was describing to us. In case you haven't been on a Ferris wheel lately, or maybe never, we have just a little video clip that'll give you a sense of riding the Ferris wheel.
Oh God! We're gonna die! at that. You like this?
Ooh.
你喜不喜欢的
Hey, I want to go there.
Whoa, this is awesome.
Relax.
你怕不怕的
We're so
The
far.
water park.
Whoa, seriously, we're so far. Whoa.
Seriously?
Hope we don't fall.
No, we'll not fall. Look at that. Wow, look at that ocean.
Whoa, we're so far. Oh, down. Wow.
Wow, look at that down there. Wow, that's amazing.
Just a little clip to remind you of what it's like. That was one some of you may have recognized Wildwood. That's where that one was taken. And you can see just a magnificent perspective. Oh, this is a people-powered one. This is the most dangerous Ferris wheel video. See the guys hanging on it? They make it go faster, and then they also have to hang on it to slow it down. So in case you find yourself in Mumbai, you can also find a Ferris wheel. Ferris wheels are everywhere. So what does a Ferris wheel have to do with this scripture reading that we chose from Deuteronomy? Well, when I thought about perspective, all I could think of was Moses standing at Mount Nebo at the end of his life and seeing where his people would be going without him. When I went to the Holy Lands, we flew in and out of Jordan, and Mount Nebo is actually in Jordan. So that was our first stop. And in fact, it was a pretty awe-inspiring visual to be able to see that whole land. And from there, we went to Jericho, just as the Israelites had done. It was pretty awesome. And as I think about Moses having that perspective of where they'd been and where they were going, that's the same kind of perspective we can get from a Ferris wheel. You can get it from the top of a mountain, from an airplane. If you're viewing the Grand Canyon or one of those magnificent vistas, it just kind of takes your breath away, doesn't it? And when we are up at that perspective, we see things quite differently from when we are firmly grounded with our 2 feet here on earth. Certainly those first people of Israel that journeyed with Moses and ventured into Canaan with Joshua may have felt a lot like that little boy on the Ferris wheel who said, "We're going to die!" And a lot of those people, I'm sure, felt that way. So what is this book of Deuteronomy? We don't really spend much time hearing it preached to. We seldom read it, and yet there are more citations about Deuteronomy in the New Testament than any other book in the Old Testament. What I love about Deuteronomy is that it brings together it weaves together religion and ethics and social concerns, and it's all under one umbrella, one book. In Deuteronomy, you will find the 10 Commandments written quite differently than we find them in Exodus. You'll find laws quite different from the way they're written in Leviticus. Deuteronomy is one of those books that kind of acts as a bridge between the Pentateuch, what the Hebrew people call the Torah, and then the books of history. It really provides that kind of a bridge. For Christians, it's also a powerful book because it has this very strong attitude of action, and it has a focus that focuses us on love and gratitude and obedience, and that's been fundamental to us as Christians. I think it's especially interesting to read through it, and it is 34 chapters, so it's a bit of reading, but if you're up for it, it gives you a very different look at a land and a group of people given our perspective now from the 21st century and what's going on in that part of the world. As Brian so aptly described, Moses was supposed to have been 120 years old when he got to the end of his life. And this book of Deuteronomy is known as his farewell speech. We believe that it came to us it's written from the perspective of coming from Moses, of course, but scholars really think that it probably was a compilation of authors who put this together because there were important lessons in there for all of humankind. One of the most important lessons, perhaps, for the religious tradition is that Moses was a leader par excellence. There was no one that came after him as a human-born leader in that Old Testament time that could hold a candle to Moses. None of the judges, none of the kings, none of the prophets. They all looked to Moses as the man of wisdom, the one who had lived for many, many years and had gone through many, many things and always had his people at the heart of everything that he did. So one of the lessons that we take from the Ferris wheel is that lesson about perspective that's gleaned from the wisdom of life. Now, how am I going to weave together the Deuteronomy and the Ferris wheel? Well, here we go. Take a ride with me. There are some lessons to be learned from going around that Ferris wheel. What's the first thing you do? Before you get on the Ferris wheel, you've got to purchase a ticket and get in line. And just like when you're standing in line and watching that wheel go around, waiting for your turn to get on, I imagine that the Hebrew people probably felt something like that when Moses said, "Come on with me. We're going into the wilderness." It's like, really? Seriously? Seriously? That's what we think we're going to do? You know, they were firmly grounded in Egypt. Their life may have been one of slavery, but they knew where their next meal was coming from. Their families were there. They'd been there for quite a while. Generations had already been established for them in Egypt. And now he's asking them to leave everything they know and go someplace into the unknown. It's kind of like the same feeling the first time you get on that Ferris wheel ride. And some of you may resonate with those feelings of not wanting to leave home. Some college students have a hard time leaving home and keep coming back. I have a lot of family in North Jersey who refuses to leave North Jersey. And many of you grew up in this area, have been in this area for generations. You may have moved away and moved back. You know that feeling of not really wanting to venture too far from home. So as they embarked on their journey with Moses, it was kind of like boarding that Ferris wheel. Once you're on that ride, though, it's really tough to get off once they've strapped you in, although I do have to say, I can remember riding that Ferris wheel in Asbury Park with a family member, and she screamed so loud that, in fact, they did stop it and let her off. Now, I haven't ridden a Ferris wheel in several years, but I do remember the excitement that starts and that builds as you take that journey to the top. It's exciting for me, and it was awesome, that kind of shrinking of the crowd and just that feeling of hanging up there and swinging. And then over the top you go. Over the top you go. But when you're up there, there's a feeling of freedom that you get. Kind of like when you were a newlywed and you go into your first apartment or home, or maybe as a single person going into your first apartment, going off to college, that first time of knowing a sense of freedom. Maybe for some of you it starts when you get behind the wheel of a car. I know there's some new drivers out there. There's a sense of freedom, and that's what we hope the people of Israel felt. And yet an awful lot of them probably did not. And when you reach the top of the Ferris wheel, like they would reach the top of a hill, you can see the next steps you're going to take, and then down the hill they would go and on their journey. The road wasn't always easy for them. There were hills, and it certainly was filled with all kinds of challenges along the way. Similar journeys would have been felt by the pioneers in our own country, or any one of a number of adventurers who just want to go and see what else is out there. We've heard several of those, had some of them just in our own congregation this year. I can think of at least one young woman who just came back from an adventure overseas. There's all kinds of adventures to be had out there, but some of us are not quite as adventurous as others. And so the Ferris wheel keeps turning, and then you feel that little flip-flop in your stomach, and down you come. Unlike the Hebrew people who wandered, and they did wander through the wilderness, unlike those people, we know what's going to happen with the Ferris wheel. It's going to go around and around and around. But for those first Israelites, as they left and they wandered, they didn't know where they were going. This was a journey into the unknown. That feeling of change into the unknown is something that we all can relate to, can't we? That feeling of not knowing what's going to happen because of something that's occurring in our lives. Sometimes we don't have a choice about the changes that happen in our lives, but we do have a choice about how we approach those changes. We've talked about this before. It's all about attitude, isn't it? When we're in the midst of change, we can complain, we can lament, we can refuse to adapt to our new life, or we can look for some joy in there. We can look for a lesson to be learned from the change. Sometimes it takes a long, long time to realize what good can come from the changes that are happening in our lives. And then we just kind of pray for patience to get through those changes. As our ancestors wandered in the wilderness, they certainly did become disheartened. They certainly complained a lot. But Moses continued, and they followed. Like the Ferris wheel, life goes on. I'm always taken aback by the idea of Moses wandering. He was supposed to be a leader. How come he didn't know where he was going? Why do we always talk about wandering in the wilderness? And then I thought, well, maybe he really was a very special leader because he was able to give the people the time and the support and the guidance that they needed as they moved from one place to the next. The changes that were going on in their lives were not easy changes at all. But through time, they got to know one another and they learned a new way of approaching life. So I wonder, when was the last time that you wandered? Did you ever wander like the people of Israel did? Wander not knowing or caring what time you were going to get wherever it was you were going, not knowing where you were going to sleep that night, not knowing where you were going to get your next meal. That kind of wandering requires a huge amount of faith. And it certainly goes against the grain for most of us Americans to take that kind of a wandering journey. But there's a wonderful book called An Altar in the World by Barbara Brown Taylor. And in it, she talks about the practice of wandering, the practice of getting lost, she calls it. Now, I'm not sure that Moses was actually lost, but I'm guessing that he might have been lost along the way somewhere. But Barbara Brown Taylor says, once you leave the cow path, the unpredictable territory is full of life. You agree to become aware of each step you take, turning all of your senses to exactly where you are and exactly what you are doing. If you've ever gotten lost, you know that you have to pay attention to where you are and what your surroundings are. And that's what Taylor is talking about. And Moses certainly would have had to know every bit of the journey as he was wandering and getting lost. He had a whole flock of people who were depending on him. That was not an easy journey at all. I picture Moses as a man who cared deeply for his people. And so when they started to complain and wondered where there was food, where their food was going to come from, all he could do is pray and put his faith and his trust in God. Another of Barbara Brown Taylor's worshipful practices is the practice of walking the earth. The practice of walking on the earth, that's something too that Moses would have had to have done. Been just responsible as a leader, he needed to know where he was walking. But what Barbara Brown Taylor is talking about is something even more intentional. Her practice of walking is more like watching a little one take the first steps. You know what it's like when a little one is just putting one foot in front of the other and really just worrying about balance, and the hands go out, and you can just see their foot. And they do much better walking barefoot because you can bend your foot and they bend their foot. And that's the practice of walking. Really being intentional about every single step. If you are an adult who has walked with a little person, you know that the view from down there is a whole lot different. And if you take little steps like a little child does, you'll become much more aware of what your feet are doing, but also what's on the ground. Every part of our lives can in fact be an altar to the world. It can be a worshipful moment where we stop and we say, "Thank you, God." And as we reflect on Moses, as we reflect on that Ferris wheel, perhaps that's another perspective that we have from today. As the Ark of the Covenant traveled with the Hebrew people for generations, we too take God wherever we go. And those worshipful moments can happen any time. And then we get to the top of the Ferris wheel. My favorite worshipful moment. Is that not a spiritual moment when you just get stopped up there and can see all around you? For some of you, it may be really scary. For others, it's really exciting. That view is just incredible. Up there, you feel separate. You feel like your own person, able to do anything, looking down at all the people around you, out at the ocean, out at the horizon. You think about maybe those people that are down there playing games of chance, and you wonder, what opportunities have I taken, or what opportunities have I missed? What kind of chances have I taken? And then you maybe think about all those people that are eating that wonderful, delicious food that they're going to regret eating the next day. Maybe you start thinking about some regrets that you have. Or maybe you smile to yourself and say, "I have no regrets." Those are the kinds of perspectives you can get when you're up there, up in the clouds. Look where we are, look where we've come from, and look where we could be headed. As Moses stood there on Mount Nebo, having commissioned Joshua, he knew he wasn't going any further, and so that was his perspective. His perspective ended there, but he knew that others would carry on. And as our Ferris wheel comes back down to earth, we have a choice to make, don't we? The perspective we had while we were at the top can have an impact on our life or not. We could learn something from that perspective and change our lives, or we can just leave it behind as we step off and back into reality. The perspective we glean from the wisdom of life and put into action, that's the mark of a leader. Moses had that wisdom and that perspective, and he sent the people on from there. We too have the opportunity to approach life from a new perspective, not just when we ride a Ferris wheel, but any time that we take that few moments to reflect on our life, where we've been and where we've come from. But let me just close with the words that Moses repeated over and over in the reading that we heard this morning. He said, "Do not be afraid, do not fear, and do not be dismayed. The Lord will not forsake you or fail you." Those are words that we can take with us wherever we go, just as Moses did. Do not be fearful, do not be dismayed. The Lord is with you.